September 11th, 1973, I was in class at the Catholic University of Chile when we heard British Hawker Hunter jets fly over and bomb the presidential palace. That night, the country went under lockdown, and we were going to go to the estadio and see if we could find out about the kids that might be there. I went through the second door, and a young Chilean soldier with a submachine gun turned and pointed it at my chest.
Who is Skipp to you?
He taught me how to live. I got to say that if I hadn't been working with him, I would have gone on a different path that I'm on today.
I didn't have those dreams. He dreamed them for me first.
So I never really had that father type figure, right? And, Skipp's become that for me.
In essence, he challenged me to pick between an uncertain future or a well-learned mind with unlimited opportunities. I recognize that had not it been for him, there is a big likelihood that I wouldn't be here.
I couldn't even think to pay back to Skipp what he's done for me.
He doesn't do it for attention or fame or money or anything, especially not money. That guy's broke.
I am very uncomfortable when people say that I have done something for them or to help them or to change them. I've just been myself.
When they told you you're going to the firing squad, my life is ending in the next 15 minutes, like what is the emotion?
I was young and cocky. I was 30 years old. It was after the moment I realized I don't have a choice. I must be a priest. When I talk about the joy of priesthood, I cry.
Skipp, Father Skipp, Flynn. Skipp, I call you a priest. Well, you are a priest, a therapist, and a frat-star, all in one. You have this energy that is infectious. It's loving, it's caring, it's kind, it's compassionate. It's that of a priest, that of a therapist. Always curious, always asking questions, there to help that person. But also one of a frat-star, where it's just, you don't care. You don't give a fuck what people think. You just come out and you say it the way it is, the way that you see it, the way that, and you're compassionate with it. So it's really incredible to be here sitting with you. And thank you so much, Tom. Thank you so much for joining me on The Fulfilled Being.
Well, first, welcome to Casa Flynn. And I appreciate what you said a second ago. You used the word safe. Whether it was in my office many, many years ago working in a Florida prison system, my office for 11 years at the University of Miami, or here, I want people to feel safe. I hope that people feel safe with me. I often say to clients, remember, you called me, I didn't call you. And by that, I mean, in calling me, they're giving me permission to speak honestly and truthfully. I'm not the kind of counselor or therapist that's, tell me what you think and how you feel. Especially 9 years. You don't work for 11 years in the Florida prison system without guards around, totally unprotected, without developing an attitude that, what the hell? You came to me, you want help, so my clerks in the prison system always used to say to convicts when they would walk out and they didn't get what they want, remember, Father Flynn doesn't give you what you want. He gives you what you need. And please, God, that's the way I try to live my life. I don't necessarily give people what they want, but I'll give them what they need.
Sorry.
I
love how sometimes how eccentric that could be, right? It really, there is no rules for you. It's like you've been ordained as a priest, but outside of that, it's coming back to thinking about when you would counsel me, and you still counsel me. It's you've been a counselor for me for 10 years now, likely, probably around that. And I remember coming to you after college, and I was not feeling good. Didn't know what way to turn, what way to go. And you say, hey, it's life. Let's live it. Let's have a little fun with it. Break the rules a little bit. You know what I mean? Is that the thought behind it?
Yeah. I believe we only get to live this life once. We might as well have fun with it. You've made reference. I can't change the fact that I'm now approaching 48 years as a priest. That's embedded in me. It's a part of the essence of me. So because it's a part of the essence of me, I bring that to everything that I do in my counseling work, or everything I do in just plain living. Okay? And I'm sitting here, and it strikes me, about a week before he died, Jesus said to his disciples, I'm going to go to Jerusalem, and they're going to kill me, because I've got to deliver the message that I have to deliver. And in one of the Gospels, it says, and having said that, he sets his face resolutely towards Jerusalem. He knows he's about to die. And yet the next thing he does is say to the disciples, some of you go on ahead and get ready for the Passover party. Jesus was going to live his life fully up to the very end. He partied the night he was arrested. That's a wild, crazy idea. But if the Jesus of the resurrection that I have lived, I'm now approaching, when I think about it, I'm approaching 56 or 57 years in religious life. I'm approaching 50 or 48 years as a priest. If the Jesus to whom I've given my life can party the night before he's died, then I can party my life.
Mm.
I always get a kick out of the nun, a cloistered nun who designed my ordination invitation. And in the years after ordination, every time I would see her, the first words out of her mouth were, "You mean you're still in?" So you've obviously got questions or ideas.
The idea of we only live once and let's live it to the fullest is so powerful, because I feel like sometimes I'm overthinking these things, and I think that I need this in life or that in life. I'm taking certain things so seriously, and whatever it is, whether it be a project, whether it be work, whether it be a relationship, we think that we need these things, and we're so afraid of things going wrong. Whereas the lesson that you just shared about Jesus is, you know you're about to die, but let's still live it to the fullest, right? I feel like life is a death sentence. We're all gonna die, and so let's live it. Let's do our best today to just take that joy, whatever we can, and laugh about it.
When I was a child growing up here in Miami, and I'm a Miami native, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod used to have a television show. This was back in the days when there were only 3 networks. And one of their taglines was the line of Jesus, I have come that they may have life and that they may have it to the fullest. The great command, I always love this. I always do dialogue sermons. I ask questions and try and elicit answers. And one of my favorite dirty tricks, and it's a great barroom trick if you're around drinking Christians, a lot of Southern Baptists, although they won't tell you that. Ask them what the great commandment is. Mm-hmm. And eventually, after be nice and be kind and after all of that stuff, they'll finally come to the great commandment of Jesus in the Gospel of John. This is my commandment, that you love one another. Great, they got the answer right. Now the trick question is, well, what was the why? And I can go to almost any church in America, and they'll eventually tell me what the great commandment was. But if I ask them, what's the why? They don't get it. Because Jesus, it's really 2 sentences. This is my commandment, that you love one another, so that my joy may be in you and your joy may be complete. I have, for reasons that we'll probably get into, I have a great affinity, a great love for the Christian, not just Roman Catholic, but the Christian martyrs of the 20th century. I have a great affinity, a great love for what Jewish tradition since the Holocaust calls the righteous among the nations, or the righteous Gentiles, who saved at least one Jewish life. Others of them saved hundreds. But if you look at especially the Roman Catholic martyrs of the mid-20th century, those who were killed, whether priests, nuns, friends of mine, lay people in Central America, in Guatemala, in Mexico, the Trappist monks in Algeria, the Trappist monks in China, all of them had a kind of a serenity, not a sadness, not a gloom, a sense that I'm doing what is right, and I am confident in that, and I take my joy in that. If someone has never read of the Trappist martyrs of Algeria, holy sweet Mother of God, their courage. They dared to stay because they would not leave their people, and they trusted the Christian martyrs, the Catholic martyrs of China. Incredible, deep, profound sense of quiet and peace. So, and the lay people, especially, I believe it's one of the only places in the world I still want to go. I wish I could go. Is Yad Vashem in Israel, the memorial to the righteous Gentiles, and reading reading their stories over and over and over and over again, all they ever said was, it was just the right thing to do. It was just the right thing to do.
Is there, I feel like when you're on that mission, you're doing something greater than yourself. So you've mentioned to me that you've had a similar experience to the martyrs, the martyrs, the Christian martyrs in the 20th century. How can you tell us about that experience and how that feels? Like, is there peace? Is there peace in those experiences? Is it a combination of peace and trust and fear? But if you could tell us about some of those most challenging moments in your life and understand the emotions that come up in that.
Well, what's the phrase you used to describe me, frat man?
Frat-star.
Frat-star. I never say I was a Sigma Chi at the University of Miami. I am a Sigma Chi from the University of Miami. And at the beginning of my first year of law school, one of my Sigma Chi pledge brothers was killed in Vietnam. And his funeral at St. Philip's Episcopal Church in Coral Gables was a change in my life. I won't on film in public say what I shouted at God, but God got a good dose of the F word that day at that funeral as I asked, what was it all about? I was, from the time I was 4 or 5, my family and others had me destined for Congress. And Doug Magruder's funeral changed all of that. It didn't change it in an instant. Several months later, I wrote to the Maryknoll Fathers at Maryknoll, New York, and said, I think I want to be a priest. A local priest in Miami dared me to give the seminary a whirl. Somehow or another, I managed to pass all the psychological tests to get accepted into the Maryknoll Fathers. And in 1973, I was assigned as a student, as a seminarian in graduate school, to do pastoral work in Santiago, Chile. On September 11th, 1973, I was in class at the Catholic University of Chile in the School of Theology doing graduate studies. I was actually in class when we heard British Hawker Hunter jets fly over and bomb the presidential palace. It was the beginning of a coup. That night, the country went under lockdown. Saturday, and total lockdown. Until Saturday morning, people were allowed to go out for about 5 or 6 hours. They were allowed to go to Mass on Sunday. I preached the Mass in the parish. I wasn't even a deacon, so I preached, partly because the pastor wasn't a very good preacher. He's dead now, so I can say that. And afterwards, parents came to me and they said, Pancho, our children haven't returned from the Technica, the technical university, the public university for poor kids. They said, our kids haven't returned from the Technica since Friday, and we think they're prisoners in the Estadio Nacional, the National Football Stadium. you're an American, you have an American passport, can you go and find out, see if you can find out anything about our kids? The Maryknoll Fathers had a house in downtown, close to downtown, just actually literally up the street from the presidential palace. You could walk out into the street and see the presidential palace. And one of the Maryknoll brothers that lived in the same parish with me was already there. He had gone there the night before. And I went to go and meet Joe, and we were going to go to the estadio and see if we could find out about the kids that might be there. And the way the buildings were constructed, there was a door right literally on the curb, and you walk through that, you go through another door, and then you're into the house. I went through the second door, and a young Chilean soldier with a submachine gun turned and pointed it at my chest, and I went, "Oh God, are we in trouble now?" And God just looked and said, "What do you mean we?" Joe and I were taken to secret police headquarters. We were interrogated. They kept wanting me to name names and give telephone numbers and all of American Methodist and Lutheran and Quaker and Catholic missioners that I worked with in a social justice organization. And I kept refusing. And this is a little bit arrogant, but it's true. The guard or the inspector or whatever that was interrogating me was a hunt and peck typist, and he would write out these statements, and I would look at him when he gave them to me for my signature, and I would say, "Mentira, a lie." So finally he gets really, really exasperated, and his supervisor came by and asked, "What's wrong?" And the guy said that I was being uncooperative. And "I'll clean this up," he said. "Don't worry about that son of a bitch. We're putting him in front of a firing squad in 15 minutes. That's the clean version. And I just looked at him and said, "It doesn't matter to me. I just went to Mass and Communion. Do whatever you want." Well, the result was Joe and I and others were held in a locker room in the National Football Stadium for 11 days. Most of that time in a locker room, 20 by 40 feet, maybe something like that, with 153 men and boys. On the other side of one wall, you could hear people being tortured, and somewhere in the distance on the other side of the opposite wall, you could hear the firing squad. And when finally Joe and I and others were called out, I think about 11 of us, we were called out and marched outside of the football stadium, and an American military officer was there saying he was from the American Embassy, and he had just signed a commitment on the part of the U.S. government that we would be on the first available flight out. And my response was, "I didn't agree to that. I want to go back in." Unhappily, they wouldn't allow me to do that. I was expelled about 11 days later. No, about 5 days later. But one thing happened while we were there. One time, a Dutch priest and I declare to everybody that would listen among the guards. And there's another thing I'll want to remember to tell you. We declared that we were going to go on a hunger strike to the death, and or upon our release, we were going to go before the United Nations and condemn the officers in charge there of violations of the United Nations Code of Human Rights. And we just started making things up off the top of our head. And we so terrified them that that night they allowed some of us to sleep on the dirt under the bleachers of the stadium. And it was a blanket under us and a blanket over us for myself and a young man from Uruguay who had been tortured in Uruguay during that military dictatorship. In Uruguay, he'd had an eye put out, and he had a glass eye. And when he was arrested in Chile, during his interrogation, they discovered that he had a glass eye, and they popped it out of his head and ground it in salt and pushed it back in. And all he said all night long was, "I'll never live to see my wife and children again." One time, we would be marched under the bleachers from the locker room to be fed. And one time I watched a young Chilean soldier marching back and forth in front of us, protecting these. We had heard a ranking officer screaming at the guards that all these prisoners are extranjero extremistas sumamente peligrosos, extremely dangerous foreign extremists who had come to Chile to kill Chilenos. And so many of the young Chilenos fuman como chino, they smoke like a chimney, would be our English translation. They were begging this young, he was probably a Mapuche Indian from the south of Chile. He almost certainly, one day he was in his village and a military truck pulled up, and all of a sudden all the young men were taken out of the village and you're in the army now. He had all the features of a Mapuche Indian. And he was walking back and forth. And the young prisoners were begging for a cigarette, just one cigarette. And he reached into his shirt and he pulled out a cigarette and he lit it. And he threw it at the feet of the prisoners. And they grabbed it up and shared it among themselves. And he did it again and again and again. And finally the order comes to put everybody back in the locker room. And this young soldier reaches in, he pulls out all of his cigarettes, and he threw them to the prisoners. I don't tell that story often. Those two stories, that young prisoner and that young guard, are difficult for me to remember. But I say, beginning with Doug's death And then those two experiences in the estadio. I don't have a choice. I must be a priest. I got to be a priest my way. That's why I said to the American officer, no, these are my people. I've got to go back. I always love it when people say to me, well, you're certainly not like any priest I ever met. And my answer is always, I am a Sigma Chi from the University of Miami long before I am a priest. That usually goes right over their head. But
how did it, like in those moments, was it just like in that moment you're like, I'm a priest for the rest of my life? Or were like when they told you you're going to the firing squad and you're thinking, my life is ending in the next 15 minutes, like what is the emotion, like what do you feel inside? And in that time, is it confidence, is it faith, is it fear, is it
the Lord has brought me thus far? I'm not very smart. I truly am not very smart. I don't learn facts. I would love to be a reconstructive plastic surgeon, except I just don't have the smarts for it. I learn concepts. I learn ideas that make sense to me. And one of the ideas that makes sense to me is that when I die, however I die, it's not the end of me. Einstein teaches matter and energy are neither created nor destroyed. They're merely transformed. I can't believe that the creator of the universe that I don't fully understand could let my being be destroyed. So I'll trust him. I think, I was young and cocky. I was 30 years old. I was a frat man. It was after the moment I realized I don't have a choice. I must be a priest. I just must. I must be it my way. Okay. I must be it my way. Pious Piffle, I ain't into Pious Piffle. I just finished reading a really, really wonderful biography of St. Francis of Assisi.
Skipp, I want to ask you with that, you knowing that you were meant to be a priest in that.
No, I'm not meant to be a priest. I choose to be a priest. But at the same time, having seen the pain that I've seen, having seen the injustice that I've seen, having gone through the experiences that I've gone through, I choose to be a priest, but I must be.
To serve the world, to serve
whomever comes into my presence next. To serve whomever comes into my presence next.
Do you think you would have had that same mentality to just serve whoever comes next if you hadn't gone through those experiences?
I'm afraid of what I might be like if I hadn't gone through them. They're a part of the fiber of my being. I know PTSD when PTSD walks into the room. There was a time when I was a much younger priest. There was a time when I was doing my doctoral studies, or when I was new in counseling, or when I was new in the prison system. And Vietnam vets would look at me and say, "Well, what the hell do you know about PTSD?" And I could describe living with PTSD, and they'd say, "You, I can talk to." Do I want to do it over? No way in hell. This past September was very difficult for me. Because this past September was the 50th anniversary of what happened. I wasn't overwhelmed with flashbacks or anything like that. But I lived September aware. I lived September off keel. But when I work with PTSD patients, when I work with abused patients, when I work with addicts, please God, I have a sensitivity that I could only have because of those experiences. So I choose to be a priest, but because of what happened, in order to fight injustice, I must be a priest.
And you live that 100,000%. I can speak from my own experience with you, Skipp.
You know, I'm, and this is just being honest. Please God, this isn't false humility. I haven't done anything. I've just been myself. I started to make a comment a minute ago. I just finished reading again a remarkable, very historic. It wasn't all the puffery. Biography of Saint Francis of Assisi. One of the things I was delighted to discover was apparently Francis had a tongue somewhat as sturdy as mine at times, which is a relief. Because now I can just say, well, I'm just talking like Saint Francis would. But one thing I know about Saint Francis, and it's a great American mistake. There's that wonderful prayer that everybody calls the prayer of Saint Francis. He never wrote it. It was written in the early 1900s by a French priest. But the opening line is, "Lord, make me an instrument of your peace." That was the only answer that ever came after Doug Magruder's funeral and after I cursed at God in that Coral Gables church. Not make me a great congressman or get me through law school. None of that. It's make me an instrument of your peace. And I am very uncomfortable when people say that I have done something for them or to help them or to change them. I've just been myself. After Doug's death, all I wanted to do was be a simple missionary priest. Please God, to this day, that's all I am.
This simple missionary priest, just being himself, has changed so many people's lives.
No, God has changed people's lives by using this simple missionary priest, but the priest hasn't done it. What's that thought?
Just me thinking about how much you've helped me personally, and just and I know you don't say you and you don't like it, but God and the process and coming through you, how much you've personally or God or this process has helped me. And I know all the other clients that you have, the other people that have come into your life, and you live what you say. You were my counselor, my therapist in college. That's where we met. And you helped me so much. I was having some challenging times mentally. You were very incredible through that process, helped guide me, helped me get through a difficult mental spot in my life. And that was, paid for by the University of Miami. You were employed there. And then after college, I was seeking your guidance. I got back in touch with you and you said, hey, I'm not working at University of Miami. Or you might have still been working there at the time. But you're like, look, you're not part of the system. I forgot how it was, but you're like, just come meet me at my apartment and let's chat here, right here where we're sitting. And you've helped me and guided and counseled me, and you never asked for any money in return. And you don't ask any people that you work with for money in return. If obviously you need some money to pay the bills here and keep doing what you're doing, but you really do just, it's not about you. It's about serving. It's about serving God. It's about being an agent of love, of light. And it's just incredible to see what you've done through that. And I feel like there's a lot of power, peace, and love and essence in that, because I feel like our society nowadays trains us. We have to be the biggest, the best. We have to acquire the most amount of money. And this is what a lot of the social media is teaching a lot of people nowadays. And to see the life that you've lived and the joy that you've experienced through being this simple missionary priest is, I feel like you're a counselor for me, but also a role model in terms of like,
hey, listen, I'm celibate. Don't let me be that role model.
But just on like terms of that, like being this servant of God, being this servant, how would you say your emotions are on a day-to-day basis? Like, how often do you cry of joy?
First off, I have PTSD. And there was a book, I believe it's called In the Shadow of the Sword. It was an account written by, I believe he was either a soldier or a Marine. I'm not sure, because I read it many years ago. And it was an account of two things, both his non-military biography that was written, those were the odd number chapters. And the even number chapters were about a particular battle, and it was vivid and very powerful, and you could clearly understand why he had PTSD. Those were the even number chapters, and I would read those. I was reading the book every night after I said night prayers and right before I turned out the light. I turned out the light early on most of the even number chapters because but the great grace for me of that book was the author talked about with many PTSD patients or people with PTSD, that emotions are heightened. And so watching the end of the Army-Navy game every year, and I never miss the end of the game. I try always to see the end, because at the end, the losing team goes and stands in front of the student body of the winning team, and they sing their alma mater. And then they go to the other end zone, and rather, the winning team stands before the losing team first, and then the losing team goes and stands before the winning team, and they sing their alma mater. And I get incredibly choked up. And all through it, I pray for those young men and young women. When I talk about the joy of priesthood, for me, I cry. Funny story. A couple of years ago, a very good friend of mine was going to be meeting his son in Rome, and he invited me to go. And he asked if there was anything I wanted to do, and I said the only thing I wanted to do was go overnight to Assisi. And so my friend made all the arrangements, and we arrived at our hotel, and my friend and his son immediately went to sleep in the middle of the afternoon. They went to take a nap. I ran to the basilica. I knew the crypt where St. Francis is buried is down under the basilica. I went down to the crypt, and happily, it was late enough in the day that there were virtually no people there, and I just sat for half an hour with St. Francis and cried for the pure joy of being a priest. And the next day, my friend and his son, I don't know where they went, but I was going to wander Assisi. And I was in the Basilica of St. Clair when my friend called me and said, "We've checked out. We're waiting for you. Where are you?" And I said, "Oh, I'll get there real fast." And as I'm walking out the basilica, there was the old-fashioned confessional, and a very, very young monk standing in front of the confessional and had a sign, "English." So I walked up to the young monk and I said, "I only do face-to-face." And he says, "No problem, come on in." And I walked into the confessional and I sat down and I started sobbing. And I wasn't just crying, I mean, I was practically convulsing. And this poor young monk just looked terrified. He was terrified. He didn't know what was going on. And I looked at him and I said, I'm crying for the pure joy of my priesthood. And I'm just asking for the grace of the sacrament. And he went, and he gave me absolution. And then he just looked at me and said, Father, may I have your blessing? So do I cry? Yeah. Maybe a lot of it is PTSD, but I cry for the joy of being a priest.
And on the other side of that coin, you get to experience that joy, that love, that incredible feeling. Do you still have a lot of the fear, anger, anxiety, those emotions from those difficult experiences? Do you still feel those?
I'm aware of them. The most difficult thing in the world for me to do, the most difficult thing is to book an airline passage. The second most difficult thing to do is actually get on a plane because of the claustrophobia of being on a plane. We haven't mentioned, I think I made 7 trips to teach in China, to teach about addictions and addictions counseling and basic counseling principles. The Chinese government was always informed, you know that Dr. Flynn is a Catholic priest, and they would always say, we look forward to Dr. Flynn coming here. So, but I was never supposed to say that I was a priest. Some of my students figured it out, but I wasn't supposed to talk about it. But the last trip that I made to China, I literally had pulled my luggage out of the apartment here and was standing at the elevator, and I looked up at the sky, knowing that I was about to embark the next day on a 16-hour flight from Chicago to Beijing. I looked up and I said to God, only for you would I be doing this. So, yeah, I still have residuals that they're not like the first 10 years or so of my life after Chile, but they're residuals.
So it sounds like there's still residuals. It sounds like the first 10 years after that experience was probably a lot more intense in terms of the emotions or feelings. Was there a way that you were able to have the residuals go down quite significantly in terms of the PTSD? Or was it just time?
May I tell 2 stories to the response to that?
Of course.
The bishop who ordained me a deacon and who also imposed hands on me during my ordination to the priesthood was James Edward Walsh of Maryknoll. He was 20 plus years a prisoner of the Chinese communists. Much of that solitary confinement, isolation. When I arrived back to the States, some Maryknoll priests were there to meet me and drive me up to Maryknoll, which is in northern Westchester County. And as priests with Irish backgrounds would do, the first thing they said was, what can we get you to drink? And my first response was, I haven't been able to just go for a walk. in forever. I just want to go for a walk. And at Maryknoll, at our seminary, at our headquarters, there's this massively long, maybe 150, 200 foot long corridor, a cloister corridor with vaulted ceilings and everything, and looking out over a statue of the Madonna and then the Hudson River and down to New York City. And I walked off a staircase onto the upper cloister walk, and the only person on the upper cloister walk was Bishop James Edward Walsh. And as I walked onto the upper cloister walk, he was there about 5 feet from me, closer than we are. And he looked at me and he said, "Welcome home, Francis. It's a difficult experience, but I guess some of us have to go through that kind of thing." Whew. That night, I went to sleep, woke up, my bed was literally soaked. My pillow was a sponge from sweating and crying through the night. And the first thing I did was, I just by accident, I met one of our priests who was completing his doctorate in clinical psych. And I said, "Is Mass still at noon? I want to go." And he says, "It's 4:00. And I said to him, "Okay, I need the name of a really good psychiatrist right now." And he gave me a name. And I kept calling through the late afternoon, evening. And finally, Dr. Thomas Stauffer answered the phone. And I said, "My name is Skipp Flynn. I'm a seminarian with Maryknoll Fathers right up the street from you. I've just returned from 11 days in prison in Chile. I need to see somebody soon." And he said, "My schedule is booked solid for the next 6 months. I'll see you at 8:00 tomorrow morning." So I saw Dr. Stauffer once a week for about 8 months. It was very helpful. I'm eternally grateful for him. And I really also believe it is the teaching of my church that grace comes through the sacraments. So every other Wednesday, I would finish with Dr. Stauffer. I'd go back to the seminary. I'd go to see my confessor and go to confession for the grace and, please God, the insight of the sacrament of reconciliation. So I think it was the combination of the two things that were really very helpful to me.
It's amazing that counseling gave you so much in your life, and then you give that like that same, that was in the same situation. But
Dr. Stauffer was very I'm not like that.
No. In your own style, right?
I tried to create an environment to be a person where people are safe. Too many of the people that I work with have never had anybody that they've genuinely felt safe with.
Does that stem from you being in Chile and feeling extremely unsafe, and now you feel like there's this, you want people to feel safe?
This is not a blog, or rather, this is not a commercial or a plug, but I write a blog called AuthenticHealers.com, and I write it with an Anglican priest, Father Roger Tobin. That's Authentic Healers, one word, in case you want to look it up. One word, AuthenticHealers.com. And at the very end of it, of what I just posted just a few days ago, I write about often asking or being asked to give lectures to graduate students on how I do therapy. Basically, I give them two pieces of direction or directive. I say, find one or two theories that really, really work and resonate for and with you. Read lots and lots and lots of history and lots and lots and lots of classic literature. You need those if you really want to be a good therapist. A theory or theories that work for you, and the ability to draw examples out of literature and history. But in the blog, I write something that I don't tell students. I pray for my patients, my clients. Every morning when I'm working out at the gym, as I'm working out, I review the clients that I'm going to see for the day, and I pray for them. At the end of the day, as I'm saying night prayers, and in 49 years since I was ordained a deacon, I haven't missed night prayers 20 times. At the end of the day, as I'm saying night prayers, I pray for my clients. And when I hit a roadblock that I just can't do any more to help that client, when I'm exhausted, I call the cloistered Maryknoll sisters at Maryknoll, New York. And one of them will always answer the phone. Good morning, the cloister. And I say, good and holy woman, it's the mango priest. I send them 100 pounds of mangoes a year. It's the mango priest. And they say, oh, Skipp, how are you? And then eventually in the conversation, I will tell them whom I'm asking them to pray for. And whatever sister is answering will always say something like, please tell them we place them in the heart of Jesus. Please tell them we place them in the heart of God. So even when I'm doing counseling, even when I'm working with a client, I'm often praying. The other thing I do that I would lose my license, I'd be fired from jobs, everybody would scream, no, you're not supposed to do that. I don't do it with women, but I hug men. Because it's amazing how many men have never had a warm, genuinely loving hug. And while I'm hugging them, I often pray. What are you thinking?
I'm thinking back to the hugs that you gave me. And there's so much value in getting that love. I appreciate your own unorthodox ways. And there's so many rules out there nowadays, and you are on this mission, or you have this mission given to you by God, and it shows.
It's crazy, but look, I'm just a simple missionary priest. That's all I want to be.
With the the praying, I'm sure there's people in the audience, right, that may be going through challenging times. Is there something that you've seen a commonality in terms of your clients, that a common thread that you've seen has been the most effective, that for their own personal mental well-being, their own health, their own vitality, joy, love, to help them in their path? Has there been one or two common threads of like, this has been like something that they have done, like something, an action item maybe that people can do in their own lives?
I'm incredibly big on getting daily exercise. Can I brag?
Yes.
I'm 78. I weigh 139 and I bench press 145. Okay. I broke a couple of bones in my left foot years ago, so I can't run anymore. I still do 2 miles on the treadmill at a good clip and a good incline. I think that's critical for people. One of my favorite things to tell people to do is wander. Wander. Wandering is slow. Wandering is purposeless. Wandering is without destination. Wandering is soaking in. When I used to travel to China, I always set time aside to wander. One time I was on a 2-week speaking schedule. I was doing the addictions lectures half a day, and my friend Father Scott Harris, who's a physician and an international AIDS expert, was doing the AIDS treatment lectures the other half of the day with some Chinese nurses. And I don't remember the name of the town, but I'm wandering. I wander down the street and I'm just going slow, and I look down and there's at the far end of the alleyway, there's a big blue A over a doorway. And I said, I'm going to go down and see. If there's an omega over another doorway, I'm going in. Jesus in the gospel is described as the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. So sometimes you'll see those letters over Catholic church doors. I walk down, and suddenly I see an Omega, and I said, I'm going in. And there was this Chinese man carving a coffin, carving all the elaborate design work into a coffin. And he sees this jeans and sneakers and polo shirt with the University of Miami U on it. And he just looks up, and I said, Washir Shenfu, Washir Shenfu, I am a priest, I am a priest. And he goes running off. And the next thing I know, this man in his 30s comes through with really some pretty scattered, broken English, but he's the chancellor, he's the assistant to the bishop of the diocese. And we spent time talking. And finally, I told him what I was there for, that I was giving lectures on addictions and AIDS and counseling. And I said, any of your priests or sisters who want to come to my lectures, they are my guests. So for the next 8 or 9 days, this group of 4 Chinese nuns showed up every day. And more than all the doctors, more than the nurses, more than anybody, they just soaked it up. And they explained through a translator, they explained that they ran like a hospice for battered women, and that they took the broken of the broken. And on our last day, for our last lecture, they show up and one of them has this great big blanket wrapped like a bag or a sack behind her on her back and wrapped around her neck. And they explained to us that they were very, very poor, that they wished that they could give us some gifts to Father Scott and myself to thank us. And they gave us little tiny carved fish, one of the earliest Christian symbols of Christianity, the fish, and tiny little carved crosses that were made out of a local stone. And the nun pulls off this great big blanket and opens it on the table, and they explain that they had gotten up at 4 o'clock in the morning to pick apples for us. If I had rushed, if I had been in a hurry, I'd never have seen that alpha. I tell my clients, don't run to get out of the rain. No matter what happens, even with an umbrella, you're going to get wet. Walk in the rain. Take off your shoes. I've told more than a few University of Miami students. Take off your shoes. Take off your socks. Walk barefoot in the rain. Walk through, jump in, kick and splash mud puddles. Be a kid. Again, what is it? I'm a fraternity what?
Frat-star.
I'm a frat-star. I'm a frat-star. I tell kids, play in the rain. Sigma Chi, one of the great lessons that I've taken from my being a Sigma Chi is we have what's called the Sigma Chi Creed. And the second line of the Sigma Chi Creed is, I will endeavor to retain the spirit of youth. I'm 78, 48 years a priest, 56 or something in religious life. I still endeavor to retain the spirit of youth. Wander, be a kid. We should all be kids until we're at least our early 30s. Quick story. When I've worked my way up on the flat bench to bench pressing 145, I always get a kid at the wellness center at the university to spot me. And I look at him and I say, do you know the rules? And he says, don't let it fall or don't touch the bar. And I thought, no. There are 2 rules. The first rule is, I'm a very old man. It's not supposed to fall through my chest and kills me. The second rule is, I'm a very old Catholic priest. If it falls through my chest and kills me, you must go to Rome and kneel before Pope Francis and beg forgiveness. They get this look on their face like, and then they get that I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Or if I'm using a piece of equipment at the wellness center and I'm finished and some kid asks if he can use the equipment, I say, you owe me $1. I have an account over there at the desk. I just warmed it up for you.
Yeah.
Wander, play in mud puddles, walk in the rain, be a kid.
Mm. So powerful. I feel like we often forget to do it, right? I personally can speak from my experience sometimes in life. All these goals, objectives, things to build, things to accomplish, and we sometimes forget to wander and move slow. And I feel like personally some of the greatest experiences of my life are when I wander and there's no objective, as you mentioned, there's no objective to it. And to just enjoy the presence of walking into a store, having an interaction. You might have that interaction like you had talked about, where you see the outfit and you go in and then you meet these incredible women, and then you have these 4 days together because you were moving slow, you were wandering, you didn't. And I feel like for myself personally, I may have like a certain goal or objective in my mind. Like, for example, for myself, like building this podcast, right, is a goal, is something that is a mission of mine. And I think that there's these certain ways to build it. Like, oh, okay, so I create this plan and I'm like, all right, I got to go and do this plan. But when we're so focused on the plan, the one track mind, sometimes if we move a little slower, maybe we have a great interaction with someone, and then that could be an incredible guest on the podcast, or it could lead to some other sort of connection that could do amazing things. And I feel like if we're so one track, like this is the way, we're eliminating the thousands of beautiful things that can come in this world.
And beautiful things. Occasionally I'll splurge on a steak, but I make sure the one thing, it's not a luxury, it's a need in my life. I always have fresh blooming orchids in my home. Always. And they're cheap in South Florida.
Mm.
They're so inexpensive. And I try and grow them on the patio, not with much success, but when I can get one to actually bloom, with great joy. But I always have fresh orchids right there on the table next to you, because I work at that table. And every now and then, 6, 8, 10 times a day, I just let my gaze focus on the orchids and celebrate their beauty.
Wow. 6, 8, 10 times a day. So you're conscious about it. 6, 8, 10 times a day, you look there and you just spend some time.
Even if it's just a couple of seconds.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is profound to me. That is because I feel like sometimes I can get out of the loop in terms of presence, right? Because presence is so beautiful. It's amazing. And just having something like that you can turn to every day, it almost feels like a grounding technique, that if maybe you're moving too fast, or it just is a good reminder.
Well, one of my closest friends in priesthood, who's really crazy as a loon, okay, has always been crazy as a loon. I say that lovingly and diagnostically. It's interesting that I have my Christmas crib behind me because my friend has a massive collection of Christmas cribs. They're up year round, and he talks to all the statues. The crib behind me is 3 sets that have all come to me through my family. The primary figures in the crib are from the set that my parents brought back from Germany 60 years ago. Others were given to me by my aunt and uncle shortly after I was ordained when I was starting to work here in Miami. Others are from my brother that my parents had given him before he died. There's lots of tchotchkes in my apartment. The Christmas tree on the little table next to you, it was a gift to me from my parents 2 years after I was ordained when I was living in the Sigma Chi house as the graduate advisor. The artwork in my apartment is all Florida artwork. Everything in this apartment, I don't think really I've bought anything for myself except the orchid plants. Everything else have been gifts to me, and they're on display because when I become aware of them, when I focus on something like the yellow-headed Amazon parrot on a shelf over there, I know precisely who gave that to me, and it reminds me to pray for them, just for an instant, just for a second. And it unites me to someone whom I love very deeply.
Do you create a practice of it, or it's just you being it's just natural? Like you
It's
see it,
become
you just
the
see
way
it.
I am.
Did it start off with you being like, okay, I'm going to do this daily, like I'm gonna see that and I'm gonna pray, or did it just kind of happened
It's
organically?
just grown organically. I begin my Mass sitting right almost exactly where you're sitting. I say Mass every day. I begin my Mass. It almost takes me longer to pray to consciously be aware of people. It almost takes me longer, that shopping list of people that I'm praying for, to go through the shopping list than it takes me to say the rest of the Mass.
And that feeling during it, I'm sure is just like I'm sure it's a beautiful experience to pray.
It's just who I am. I mentioned earlier, I probably in 40, almost 49 years, because you make the promise when you're a deacon, you make the promise to pray the divine office. Well, I'm not in a monastery, so I don't go through the 5 times to the chapel every day to pray the divine office, but the last of the divine office is Compline. It's night prayers. And I said earlier, not bragging, but I've missed Complines maybe 20 times in 49 years. That's just a part of who I am. I try to get clients that I work with to distinguish between likes, wants, and needs. I'd like a new car. I want a Mercedes. I need transportation that just gets me back and forth between here and the wellness center. So until a friend of mine insisted on buying me a new car a couple of years ago, I had a 30-plus-year-old Chevy that my brother gave me that when it rained, the water came up through the floor on the passenger side. That's all I needed. All I needed was transportation. Would I have liked a new car? Yeah. Did I want a particular car? No. I just needed to get around. Too many people get caught up in their likes, or first and primary, their wants. And then their likes, and they forget their needs. I have met living bodies without soul. We've all met living bodies without soul. And that's because they spent way, way, way too much of their life on their wants, on their likes, and never figured out what they needed.
What do you need?
I've got everything I need. I really do. And by the grace of God, I worked for the Florida prison system as a chaplain long enough, and the university and all. My mortgage is paid. I eat simply. I live simply. I have a very special friend who is very generous to me and makes it possible for me to not fear. Doesn't say I don't worry about meeting some bills sometimes. I worry. Okay. But I need to say night prayers. I'm not sure if this has gone the way you expected it.
Life is life just goes, right? It's cool to wander, right? To wander and have this incredible experience together. And thank you for sharing your wisdom and knowledge and joy and your experiences. I just feel like you're such an incredible person and have helped so many people, and I'm grateful to have you on this platform. Hopefully a few more people can see and learn so much from you, just like I have.
Thank you.
I appreciate you, Skipp.
Thank you. I appreciate that.